Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a city filled with fandom for sports, art, and history. But there's a lesser-known community that exists: pro wrestling. With displays of athletic feats, skilled storytelling, and a rich history, the art of pro wrestling is a combination of everything beloved by Philadelphians. This story is about the history of pro wrestling in Philadelphia and the people who made the community what it is today, showing that Philadelphia is more than just the city of brotherly love. It's the city of pro wrestling.
In progress.
After Saturday morning cartoons, this would have been around 1990. I used to watch whatever was in the local UHF station's block, and every week right after the cartoons ended, I would see the opening credits of WWF Superstars. This is back in the day when you physically had to get up and change the dial on a lot of televisions. So one week I maybe didn't know where the remote was or it wasn't in reach, and I had to get up to change the channel, didn't feel like doing it, left it on, and I watched my first episode of WWF Superstars, and I was hooked. Wrestling in Philadelphia actually goes back a very long way. There were catch-as-catch-can, ostensibly shoot-style wrestling matches in Philadelphia in the earliest days they happened anywhere, the late 1800s, late 19th century. But it was something that became more serious, more regular in the 20th century for sure. The 30s through mid-50s, Ray Fabiano was a major promoter in Philadelphia, ran out of several different venues, including toward the end of the run there, the Metropolitan Opera House, which is now a concert venue on Broad Street in Philadelphia. And he would have some major names in wrestling come in there. And then through the 1950s, beyond the 1950s as well, the NWA would, of course, have their champions come through and wrestle matches. It's also worth mentioning the Gold Dust Trio, who were three individuals who really just had a huge influence over the history of really modern pro wrestling. The Gold Dust Trio was Ed Strangler Lewis, one of the most famous names in early pro wrestling, Billy Sandow, who was his manager, and then another wrestler, Joseph Toots Monk. And these three were just hugely influential in how pro wrestling was presented, really taking it from its carnival origins, where it was presented more like a sideshow, into a proper form of entertainment. There were a lot of wrestling maneuvers that you see today, aspects of the wrestling match. These conventions were essentially created by the Gold Dust Trio. And it's relevant to Philadelphia because after the group disbanded, Toots Monk essentially made his way over to the East Coast and spent some formative time in Philadelphia. From there, he got in with the New York wrestling scene and, of course, the Capital Wrestling Corporation, what formed the basis of the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, today's WWE. In the 1980s, wrestling essentially became more mainstream globally than it ever had before. Pro wrestling had been on television in the US and in other countries around the mid-20th century because it was a relatively cheap form and still is a relatively cheap form of entertainment to produce. However, in the 1980s, what happened with the WWF is that it blew up and became this pop cultural phenomenon, filling stadiums not just for certain big matches, but routinely filling arenas for these huge events. WrestleMania every year becoming this, as it said, Super Bowl of sports entertainment. And that really was a successful effort on Vince McMahon's part. Essentially, what he did was bring together a lot of the top performers from all the different pro wrestling territories across North America and really even beyond that, and put them together under the World Wrestling Federation banner. It was a ruthless way that he did this. It wasn't always in keeping with the ethics of the National Wrestling Alliance that for so many years had controlled the industry in the United States, but it was successful. It did put pro wrestling in the mainstream in a way that it had never been before. And the WWF essentially had this stranglehold over the industry because while the National Wrestling Alliance, NWA, did still exist and still did well for a time, it was really just a matter of some bad decisions, some people stepping away from positions of power that they had previously held, and then ceding more and more territory control to Vince McMahon, where it was more of this kind of homogenous vision for wrestling.